So you know something that everyone likes doing is giving advice. Everyone knows how to solve other people's problems, right? So that's why I love to do this activity with my ESL or EFL students. It's called Agony Ant. Agony Ant, it's just an advice column that was in newspapers, I guess in Canada or the US. And people write in with their problems, and then the Agony Ant gives advice to these people and tries to solve their problems for them. So this is ideal for the unit in the textbooks that you can find, should and shouldn't, for giving advice. So the way it works is that I come up with a problem, something that's common kind of in the country that you're teaching and age appropriate as well. So I taught university students in Korea mostly. So my problem was there were these high school students, or a high school student that was studying for it's called the Sunung exam. I guess it's kind of like the SAT that students would take in their grade 12 year. And it basically determines their entire future, their score, based on that, what university they'd get into. And it was kind of this like very big, serious, kind of like scary, stressful thing that students would spend their entire lives preparing for, basically. So anyway, it was a student in grade 12 preparing for this exam. And they were exhausted, they weren't sleeping, they weren't eating, they were losing a bunch of weight, and basically they were just in really rough shape. And they were so worried about their score on the test, their parents were hassling them to study more, and it was just a big mess. So I'd put students into groups, and then I'd give them something like probably 10 to 15 minutes, and I'd give them some time to write advice to this student. So what they would say to this person. And it was such a great one to do because all my students had been through that same process at some point in their lives, even recently as the previous year. So they all had good things to say to that student. So in groups, and then once that was done, they would read out their advice to the class. And then I would generally choose which advice I thought was best. And I mean, it was very subjective. So just kind of whatever advice was kind of some solid advice, and they did a good job using should and shouldn't, and yeah, they did quite a good job presenting it, that kind of thing. So I would just say like, oh, I really liked Team A over here, their advice was really great and you did a good job presenting, good work. But I would also say, oh, but from Team B, I liked this idea that you said, something like that. So yeah, just try out this activity, Agony Ant, for when you're teaching about advice. Hey everybody, this is Jackie from ESLspeaking.org. So today I'm going to talk about dialogue substitution. It's one of my favorite ESL reading and speaking activities. Have you ever experienced this in your class? It happens to me all the time. You know, there's those little dialogues in the textbooks that are often kind of like the lead-in to the rest of the unit. So I put students into pairs and I tell them, okay, read the dialogue with your partner. And they just blah, 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 blah. And they're finished. And then I say, okay, so that guy Bob, and I ask a question about Bob from the dialogue, and everyone's like, what? Who's Bob? And they actually like legitimately have no idea who Bob is, what Bob did, what Bob said, even though they had just finished reading it with their partner. You know what the problem is? It's not with my students, it's with me, because I didn't give them a reason to actually read carefully. This is the ultimate way to combat that. So this does require a bit of prep, so photocopy the page in your textbook, take out some of the keywords out of it, and then students have to read it together with their partner, but they have to fill in the blanks with these keywords. So the keywords could be things like the verbs, like the past tense verbs, or they could be things related to food or drink if you're teaching food or drink. Sometimes I'll put a little word bank at the top. Sometimes I won't. It kind of just depends on the level of the students. So it turns it from a simple, just like reading out loud exercise to an exercise that focuses on meaning as well. So students actually have to pay attention to what they're reading. All right, so that is my quick tip to make dialogues more interesting, engaging, difficult, and fruitful for your students. Hi, this is Jackie from ESLspeaking.org. So today I'm going to talk about this very simple activity. It's an error correction relay race. So I really like making error correction into a relay race because it turns something kind of like old and boring, error correction, do something kind of new and exciting by making it a race. It works best for kids because if you call anything a game, they'll be excited about it. And this legitimately is kind of a game, so you're not actually lying to them when you say this. I make up a worksheet that has like 10 to 15 errors on it. So maybe it'll be a paragraph, and the errors could be like things like spelling or grammar, punctuation, kind of whatever is appropriate for the level of students that you're teaching. And you also could kind of hit the highlights of what you've been teaching in the previous weeks. So I put students into groups of 4, and then I have them kind of, if possible, sit in desks that are back to back to back to back. So the first student gets the paper, and they have to read the paragraph or whatever you have and correct one mistake. Once they do that, they pass it back. That next person has to correct one mistake. One mistake, one mistake. And I tell them how many mistakes are on it. So if, for example, I have maybe teams of 4, I would try to come up with 12 mistakes. So each student would get to go 3 times. When they're done, they put up their hand, I come check. If they're correct, then they get it. If they're not correct, I usually will let them have a few more chances, or if another team may have won in the meantime, in which case I would stop the activity. To set the context. So whatever students are reading about, you want them to be able to relate that to their normal real lives. This helps them activate their prior knowledge about that topic and makes whatever they're going to read easier to understand for them. So for example, if your reading is about maybe like a travel disaster, someone lost their wallet and then they got something stolen from them, you can ask students to talk with their partner for 1 minute about any kind of travel disaster that they had. And then after that, give students a pre-reading task. So there's a million different things that you can do, and check out the blog article for some more ideas and tips for that. But a couple simple things are just to pre-teach some of the vocabulary words in that reading. If there are some important words that you think that students don't know, definitely pre-teach those words. Hi everybody, this is Jackie from ESLspeaking.org. So today I'm going to talk about one of my favorite ESL activities called Fly Swatter. So Fly Swatter is the ultimate activity if you want to create some kind of fun and excitement in your classes. And I know when I describe it, you might think, oh, this sounds like a great kids activity. However, it works for everybody. I've used it with kids, teenagers, university students, adults, everybody has really enjoyed it. It's basically a vocabulary activity. So all over the whiteboard, write down a bunch of words that students are familiar with, maybe that you've taught them in the previous weeks. Kind of space them out at random intervals, and then divide the class into 2 teams. One student from each team comes up to the whiteboard, give them each a fly swatter, and then for absolute beginners, you could simply say the word, Tuesday. The first student to slap their fly swatter on Tuesday gets a point for their team. And you can either erase the word and put a new word or just leave the word there. It's up to you, kind of depends on the level and then also how many vocabulary words you have. Higher level students, I often give hints. I would say something like, it's the day after Monday. First student to slap Tuesday gets a point. And then those students go sit down and then the next student on their team comes up to the board. Surveys. So surveys are great for ability. So on my piece of paper, I write down a bunch of questions related to ability. Can you play soccer? Can you speak 3 languages, etc.? Then students have to go around the class asking their classmates, can you speak 3 languages? If someone says yes, they have to write down that person's name and then ask a follow-up question. For example, what languages do you speak? Oh, I speak French, English, and Korean. And then they would write French, English, and Korean. If their classmate says no, they have to ask them another question on that list. So it's very simple to make your own surveys just based on whatever the topic is and the level, etc. But it works very, very well with ability. It's a nice topic. Hey everybody, this is Jackie from ESLspeaking.org. So I love 4 skills ESL activities. 4 skills activities combine reading, writing, listening, and speaking into a single activity. One of my favorites is running dictation. You can use it for just about any vocabulary set or grammar point. The students love it, and of course it's multi-skilled. All right, so I'll explain how it works with running dictation. So first of all, you need to find something, like a conversation between 2 people, maybe a poem, a short story that has some logical steps, maybe someone is cooking something. As long as you can divide it up into like the sentence level, sentence by sentence by sentence, and then it also should have a logical order in order for students to be able to do part 2. So let's do a conversation between two people. So maybe Bob and Tony. Cut out Bob's line, cut out Tony's line, Bob, Tony, etc. And the best is maybe there's like, say, 7 or 8 little strips of paper. Bob speaks 5 times or 4 times, and Tony speaks, I don't know, like 4 times or 5 times, something like that. Paste them around the room on the wall. So Bob's thing here, and then Tony and Bob and Tony. Space them out around your classroom. Then put students into pairs. So one person is the writer, the other person is the dictator. So the writer person sits at their desk with a pencil and a paper, and the dictator has to stand up. They go over to any paper. They're not in the precise order. I just mix them up randomly. So they go over to a paper. They read it to themselves silently. They try to memorize what's on that paper, and then they come back to their partner, the writer. They say it to their partner, and their partner has to write it down. If they can't get that whole sentence or that whole utterance in one go, they can go back and read that one again. It's no problem. And they just go around the classroom until they have, say, like the 8 statements on their paper. Once they do, the 2 people can sit down together and they can go through that and then put them into the correct order. So what's the first thing Bob said, and then Tony said this, and then Bob said that. And then once they're done, the students can put up their hand and I will quickly check. So I usually give a limit of how many errors they can have in their dictation, say like 3 errors or maybe even 1 for like very advanced level students, and then they have to get it into the correct order. If they've met both of those requirements, they're the winner. That's it. And I usually will go until a few more groups finish just to give them a chance to do that. And then in the end, I'll maybe have like the winning team read out their conversation just for people that didn't quite finish it. Yeah. Hi, this is Jackie from ESLspeaking.org. Today I'm going to talk about my favorite post-reading activities. So this is if you've done a reading passage or a book, something like that with your students, and then here are some fun activities that you can do afterwards. Not just fun, but also valuable, which of course you want to teach your students English effectively. So the first one is to do a character study. So if you're reading a fiction story, the characters will go through changes. You can talk about these changes, you can do a little bit of a study, you can compare and contrast some characters, and you could even do a diary entry. Get students to put themselves in the shoes of one of the characters and then write a diary entry after one of the kind of the main event things happened in that story. The second thing you could do is to get students to think about the plot. So what was foreshadowing, what was the main event, and what was the problem? How did it get resolved? So a fun way to do this is for students to make a timeline, or you could also have students write a poem of some kind. All right, the third post-reading activity is one of the most classic ones, of course, doing some comprehension questions. So this is very simple. They'll often come along with the story that you're maybe teaching, or you could write them yourself. The next thing you could do is to do a vocabulary study. So have students look for parts of speech. Like, for example, look for all the past tense sentences. Look for all the adjectives, something like that. And the final post-reading activity is to get students to give some advice to one of the characters. So you can choose a character and then the problem they faced and then get students to give advice to them, or students can choose their own character and their own problem. Okay, so please check out my blog post for way more ideas for post-reading activities, and also be sure to check out my book, ESL Reading Activities for Teenagers and Adults. Please hit like, subscribe, and catch you next time. Bye, everybody.